The courtroom was silent. No one dared to move, not even to breathe too loudly. The wooden benches were filled with people, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding before them. The judge, a stern-looking man with silver hair and sharp eyes, peered down from his high seat, his face a mask of disappointment. He tapped his gavel once, the sound echoing through the tense room. Then he spoke. "This," he said, his voice heavy with judgment, "is the most irresponsible thing I have ever seen." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. The woman standing before the judge, her belly round with pregnancy, remained still. Her hands clutched the wooden rail in front of her, but she did not tremble. She did not cry. Instead, she lifted her chin, her dark eyes burning with an intensity that no one in the room had expected. "How could you?" the judge continued, shaking his head. "Put yourself and your unborn child at such risk. This is beyond reckless. It is beyond selfish. It is." "That's enough," the woman interrupted, her voice clear and unwavering. Gasps filled the air. A pregnant woman interrupting a judge? That was unheard of. The judge's eyes widened in surprise, his lips parting as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. The room fell so silent that the ticking of the courtroom clock became the loudest sound. Everyone waited, their hearts pounding, eager to see what would happen next. Then, the woman spoke again. And what she said next would change everything. A week earlier, the woman, named Hannah Collins, had been just another face in the crowd. She had walked through the bustling streets of New York City, one hand resting on her swollen belly as she moved carefully through the crowds. At 7 months pregnant, she had learned to be cautious. People rarely made space for her, and she had to look out for herself. Life had not been easy for Hannah. She had grown up in the foster system, bouncing from home to home, never truly feeling like she belonged anywhere. When she turned 18, she was thrown into the world with nothing but a few worn-out clothes and a stubborn determination to survive. And survive, she did. She worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs to pay for her small apartment. She dreamed of going to college one day, of building a future for herself. But life had other plans. She met a man who, at first, seemed kind and loving. When she found out she was pregnant, she believed it was a blessing. But as months passed, the man's kindness faded, replaced by anger and resentment. One night, after another terrible argument, he left and never came back. Hannah was alone, but she was used to that. She refused to give up. She kept working, kept saving, kept believing that things would get better. And then, one evening, something happened that changed everything. She had been walking home from work, exhausted and hungry, when she heard a cry. A weak, desperate cry coming from a nearby alley. She hesitated. The city was dangerous, especially at night. But something in her heart told her to look. She stepped into the alley and gasped. A man lay on the ground, his clothes torn, blood staining the pavement beneath him. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes, filled with pain, flickered up to meet hers. "Help," he whispered. Hannah didn't think. She dropped to her knees beside him, pulling out her phone. "Hang on," she said, dialing 911. "You're going to be okay." The man's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "No police." Hannah frowned. "You need a hospital." No, his eyes were desperate. "Please." She didn't understand. Who was this man? Why was he so afraid of the police? But there was no time for questions. His breathing was getting worse. Making a split-second decision, she helped him up, ignoring the strain it put on her already aching body. She half-carried, half-dragged him out of the alley and onto the street. A taxi slowed down at the sight of her struggling. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, rolled down his window. "You need help?" "Yes," Hannah panted. "Please, take us to the hospital." The driver hesitated. "He don't look good." "I know," she said. "But he's not going to make it if we don't hurry." The driver nodded and unlocked the doors. Hannah pushed the man inside, then climbed in after him. As the taxi sped toward the hospital, Hannah glanced at the man beside her. His face was pale, his eyes barely open. She had no idea who he was, what had happened to him, or why he didn't want the police involved. But one thing was clear, helping him was the right thing to do. She just didn't know that choice would lead her straight into the courtroom, standing before a judge who would call her irresponsible. And she had no idea that her response would leave the entire courtroom in stunned silence. The next morning, Hannah sat by the man's hospital bed. He was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady. A nurse had told her that he had lost a lot of blood, but would survive. She should have left. She had done her part. But something kept her there. Hours passed before the man finally opened his eyes. He looked at her, confusion flickering in his gaze. "You're awake," she said, offering a small smile. His voice was hoarse. "Who are you?" "I'm Hannah. I found you in the alley. Brought you here." He blinked, as if trying to piece everything together. Then, his face darkened with worry. "Did you call the police?" Hannah hesitated. "No, but the hospital might have." The man groaned, struggling to sit up. "You need to rest," she said quickly, placing a hand on his arm. "I can't be here," he muttered. "It's not safe." Hannah frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the hospital room door burst open. Two men in suits walked in, their eyes sharp and searching. "Him," one of them said, pointing at the man in the bed. The man's face drained of color. And just like that, Hannah knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The courtroom remained silent as the judge stared at Hannah, waiting for her response. And when she finally spoke, her words would leave every single person in that room speechless. Hannah took a deep breath. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She squared her shoulders and met the judge's sharp gaze head-on. "You call me irresponsible," she said, her voice steady. "But do you even know why I did what I did?" The courtroom held its breath. The judge frowned, clearly not used to being challenged. "The facts are clear, Miss Collins. You put yourself in a dangerous situation." I saved a man's life," Hannah interrupted, her tone unwavering. The judge's gavel slammed down. "You are in my courtroom, young lady. You will not speak out of turn." But Hannah wasn't backing down. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, "I think it's time everyone heard the truth." A murmur spread through the audience. Even the bailiff, a large man who had been standing by the door with his arms crossed, leaned in slightly, as if eager to hear what she would say next. The judge hesitated, then sighed. "Very well," he said. "You have 2 minutes to explain yourself. And you better have a good reason for what you did." Hannah nodded. She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room. She wasn't just speaking to the judge anymore. She was speaking to everyone in that courtroom. She took them back to that night. The two men in suits had entered the hospital room like they owned the place. Their presence was intimidating, their eyes sharp and calculating. Hannah's instincts screamed at her. Something wasn't right. The man in the hospital bed, the one she had saved, went rigid the moment he saw them. He tried to move, but he was still too weak. One of the men stepped forward. He was tall, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Walker," he said smoothly, "you've caused quite a bit of trouble." Mr. Walker? That wasn't the name he had given Hannah. In fact, he hadn't given her any name at all. The man in the bed, Walker, gritted his teeth. "I told you," he muttered. "I'm done with this." "Done?" The second man let out a cold chuckle. "That's not how this works." Hannah's protective instincts kicked in. She didn't know who these men were, but she knew they were dangerous. "Who are you?" she asked, stepping between them and Walker. The first man turned his gaze on her, and for the first time, there was recognition in his eyes. "And you must be the Good Samaritan," he said, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She doesn't have anything to do with this," Walker said, his voice strained. "Leave her out of it." The man ignored him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black badge. "FBI." Hannah's breath caught. The second man crossed his arms. "Miss Collins, do you have any idea who this man is?" Hannah glanced at Walker. His face was pale, but there was something else in his eyes now. A silent plea. She didn't know why, but she trusted him. "He's someone who needed help," she said simply. The first agent scoffed. "Help? You have no idea what you've walked into." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This man is a fugitive." The word hit her like a punch to the gut. "Fugitive?" Hannah turned back to Walker, searching his face for answers. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The first agent continued. "He's been running from us for months." "And you?" he smirked. "You just helped him escape." Hannah felt her knees go weak. This couldn't be happening. Back in the courtroom, the silence was deafening. Hannah could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. The judge cleared his throat. "Are you telling me, Miss Collins," he said slowly, "that you knowingly aided a fugitive?" Hannah took a deep breath. "No," she said. "I had no idea who he was. All I knew was that a man was bleeding in the street. He begged me not to call the police, but I wasn't about to let him die." The judge frowned. He tapped his gavel lightly against his desk, as if thinking. And what happened next? Hannah clenched her fists. They told me I had broken the law, that by helping him, I had interfered with an active investigation. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. The judge sighed. And did you? Hannah's next words made the entire room gasp. I don't know, she admitted. Because I still don't know what's true. Hannah had been taken in for questioning that night. The agents had brought her to a cold, windowless room in the FBI building. They had bombarded her with questions. How did she find him? Had she met him before? Had he told her anything? And the most important question of all, what had he said before he lost consciousness? She had answered truthfully, but something about the way they looked at each other, the way they kept pressing the same questions over and over again, made her uneasy. After hours of interrogation, they let her go, but not before giving her a warning. Stay away from him, the first agent had said. She had wanted to. She had wanted to forget everything, to go back to her normal life. But the moment she stepped outside, she saw him, Walker, standing in the shadows, waiting for her. She should have run. She didn't. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Miss Collins, he said, are you telling me that after being warned by federal agents, you still had contact with this man? Hannah held her head high. Yes, she said. The courtroom erupted in chaos. People whispered, murmured, gasped. The judge banged his gavel. This is outrageous, he snapped. You were given a direct order, and you ignored it? Hannah's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. Yes, she repeated, and I'd do it again. The judge's face turned red. Do you have any idea what you're admitting right now? You are confessing to obstruction of justice. You are. Your Honor, a voice called out. Everyone turned. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and a man walked in. It was Walker, alive, standing tall. And the moment he spoke, the entire case turned on its head. The room went deathly silent as Walker stepped forward. The sound of his footsteps echoed across the polished wooden floor. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't supposed to be here. The FBI had made it clear he was dangerous, a fugitive, a criminal. And yet, here he was, walking into a courtroom filled with law enforcement, lawyers, and a judge who had just called her irresponsible for helping him. Every pair of eyes in the room was locked on him. The bailiff instinctively moved toward his holster. The agents from the FBI, who had been seated near the back, stiffened. One of them whispered into a radio. And yet, Walker remained calm. The judge narrowed his eyes. Who are you? Walker stopped in the center of the courtroom. He turned, meeting Hannah's eyes for a brief moment before shifting his gaze back to the judge. My name is Ryan Walker, he said, his voice steady. And I need to set the record straight. The entire courtroom was frozen. The judge leaned forward. Set the record straight, he repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. Walker nodded. He turned toward the jury, then back to the judge. I know why I'm being hunted. I know what they've told you. But what if I told you they were wrong? The agents in the back immediately stood. That's enough, one of them barked. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Sit down, or I will have you removed. The agents hesitated, clearly caught between following the judge's orders and arresting Walker on the spot. Walker exhaled. Before you decide my fate, you need to know the truth. And the truth is, suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A new figure entered, this time wearing a dark suit with a government badge clipped to his pocket. His presence was commanding. The moment he stepped in, the other agents straightened in recognition. Your Honor, the man said in a clipped, urgent voice. I need to speak to you immediately. The judge's frustration was clear. And you are. The man pulled out his badge. Deputy Director Michael Grayson, FBI. A hush fell over the courtroom. Grayson walked past Walker without so much as a glance and handed a thick file to the judge. This case isn't what you think. The judge hesitated before flipping open the file. His brows furrowed as he scanned the contents. What is this? He demanded. Grayson looked at Walker. The reason Ryan Walker has been running, he said, is because the people chasing him are not who they claim to be. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Hannah's fingers gripped the wooden railing in front of her. She knew something had been off. She had felt it from the moment those first agents questioned her. But she had never imagined this. The judge flipped through the file again, his expression darkening. Explain, he ordered. Grayson turned back to the courtroom. His voice was firm. Ryan Walker isn't a fugitive. He's a whistleblower. The room exploded into chaos. People gasped. murmured, whispered frantically. The judge pounded his gavel, but it took several attempts before the noise died down. Walker stood still, his face unreadable. Grayson continued. For the past year, Walker has been gathering evidence against a group of corrupt agents within the Bureau. They've been covering up crimes, manipulating evidence, and framing innocent people. When Walker found out, he tried to report it. That's when they turned on him. The judge's jaw tightened. He turned toward the agents at the back of the room. Is this true? The two agents who had been pursuing Walker exchanged glances. Then, without a word, they bolted toward the exit. The bailiff reacted immediately. Hey, stop. But they were already gone. Grayson sighed. That, he said, is all the proof you need. The courtroom was stunned. Walker slowly turned toward Hannah, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, relief. She had risked everything for him. And now, the truth was finally coming out. Hours later, Hannah sat outside the courthouse, the cold air biting at her skin. The trial had ended, but her mind was still spinning. She had gone from being labeled irresponsible to uncovering a massive government cover-up. She heard footsteps and looked up. Walker was standing in front of her. For the first time, he wasn't running. I never got to thank you, he said quietly. Hannah gave a small smile. You don't have to. Walker hesitated. You saved my life. Twice. She shrugged. You would have done the same. Walker chuckled. I don't know about that. But I do know one thing. What? His eyes softened. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Hannah exhaled. She had spent her entire life fighting, trying to prove she wasn't just another forgotten face. And now, for the first time, she felt seen. The story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The streetlights flickered as Hannah and Walker stood outside the courthouse, the cold air swirling around them. The world had just shifted beneath their feet, but reality hadn't quite settled in yet. Walker had been cleared, at least for now. Grayson had promised to launch an internal investigation to root out the corrupt agents who had framed him. But Hannah knew better than to believe things would be that simple. If those agents had been willing to kill to protect their secrets, they weren't going to give up easily. Walker ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. You don't have to be a part of this anymore, Hannah, he said. You've done enough. Hannah crossed her arms. You think I'm just going to walk away after everything that's happened? He looked at her, studying her expression. It's dangerous. She smirked. So is crossing the street in New York. I think I'll take my chances. Walker let out a short laugh, but his eyes were serious. They're going to come after me again. Maybe even after you. Hannah's stomach tightened. She knew he was right. Those agents hadn't just disappeared. They were out there, somewhere, plotting their next move. But she wasn't going to let fear decide her actions. They already tried to ruin my life, she said. I'm not going to let them. Walker nodded slowly. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't leaving. All right, he said. Then we need to figure out what's next. Before Hannah could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and frowned at the unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. A deep, distorted voice came through the line. You should have stayed out of this. Hannah's breath caught. Walker's face hardened. Who is it? The voice continued, low and menacing. Walk away, Miss Collins. You have no idea what you've stepped into. The line went dead. Hannah stared at the phone, her pulse pounding. Walker gently took the phone from her and redialed the number, but it had already been disconnected. They're watching, he murmured. Hannah swallowed hard. Whoever had called her wasn't bluffing, and they had just made their next move. The next morning, Hannah woke up to a knock at her apartment door. Her stomach tightened. It was too early for visitors, and after the phone call last night, she wasn't taking any chances. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a frying pan, and moved cautiously toward the door. Who is it? She called. A familiar voice came through. It's me. She let out a breath and opened the door to find Walker standing there, looking exhausted but alert. Mind if I come in? He asked. She stepped aside, closing the door quickly behind him. What's going on? Walker pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. It was a news article. FBI corruption scandal. Whistleblower claims cover-up, 2 agents missing. Hannah skimmed the text. The story detailed the accusations against the missing agents and how they had allegedly framed Walker. But something was off. This makes it sound like it's over, she said. Walker nodded. That's what they want people to think. Hannah's grip tightened on the phone. So they'll just sweep the rest under the rug? Walker's jaw clenched. Unless we stop them. She exhaled. How? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. This, he said. This is everything. Hannah stared at it. You had evidence this whole time? Not all of it, Walker admitted, but enough to expose the rest of them. Hannah felt a mix of frustration and relief. Then why haven't you turned it in? Walker hesitated. Because if I do, I'll be dead before it ever sees the light of day. Hannah's mouth went dry. Someone high up doesn't want this getting out, he continued. And as long as they don't know where the drive is, I have leverage. Hannah sat down, trying to process everything. So what do we do? She asked. Walker met her gaze. We find the right person to give it to. Hannah narrowed her eyes. And who do we trust with something like this? Walker sighed. That's the problem. Before Hannah could respond, a loud crash came from outside. Walker was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window. He peered out, his body going still. What is it? Hannah whispered. Walker turned back to her, his expression grim. They found us. Hannah barely had time to react before there was another loud bang. This time on her front door. Bam, bam, bam. FBI. Open the door. Hannah and Walker exchanged a look. This isn't Grayson, Walker murmured. Hannah's mind raced. If the real FBI had come, Grayson would have warned them. That meant, they're not here to arrest us, she whispered. They're here to make sure we never talk. Walker grabbed the flash drive and stuffed it into his jacket. We need to go? Now. Hannah's heart pounded. There's no way out. The fire escape is blocked. Walker scanned the room, thinking fast. Then, he grabbed her hand. There's always a way out. Bam! The doorframe splintered as someone kicked it in. They had seconds. Walker pulled Hannah toward the window, and before she could even protest, he shoved it open. The street below was 2 stories down. It wasn't a long drop, but in her condition, it might as well have been a mile. Walker turned to her. Do you trust me? Hannah hesitated only for a second. Then, she nodded. Walker climbed onto the ledge and reached for her. Then jump. Hannah inhaled sharply. The footsteps were getting closer. No time. She took Walker's hand and jumped. The air rushed past Hannah's face as she fell. For a split second, her stomach lurched, and her heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. Then, impact. Walker had positioned himself below her, breaking most of her fall as they tumbled onto a pile of discarded cardboard boxes in the alley behind her apartment. Pain shot through her side, but she pushed herself up. Are you okay? She gasped. Walker groaned, rubbing his shoulder. Yeah, remind me never to do that again. Above them, the fake FBI agents were shouting, their heavy boots pounding against the floor of her apartment. They had seconds before those men realized they were gone. Walker grabbed Hannah's hand. Move. They sprinted down the alley, the cold morning air stinging Hannah's face. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but she forced herself forward. A gunshot rang out behind them. Bang! Hannah flinched as a bullet ricocheted off the dumpster beside her. They're shooting at us, she gasped. Walker swore under his breath. Keep running. They turned a sharp corner and nearly collided with a man throwing trash into a dumpster. He yelped and stumbled back as they rushed past him. Hannah's lungs burned, but she kept going. There. Walker pointed toward a busy street up ahead. If we can get to the crowd, they won't risk shooting. Hannah didn't question him. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, pushing through the exhaustion. Another gunshot. A woman screamed from a nearby window. But then, they were in the street. They burst onto the sidewalk, nearly crashing into a group of tourists taking pictures. Horns blared as cars whizzed by. The men chasing them skidded to a halt at the edge of the alley, their faces twisted in frustration. They had lost the element of secrecy. Walker pulled Hannah into the flow of pedestrians, keeping his head down. We need to disappear. Fast. Hannah's breath was ragged, but she nodded. Where do we go? Walker scanned the street, thinking fast. Then his eyes landed on a bus pulling up to a nearby stop. Come on. He tugged her toward it. They climbed aboard just as the doors were closing. Walker quickly pulled out a few crumpled bills and shoved them into the fare box. The bus lurched forward. Through the window, Hannah saw the fake agents still standing at the alley's edge, their expressions dark. They had gotten away. For now. 20 minutes later, they got off at a station on the other side of the city. Hannah's legs felt like jelly, and her ribs ached from the fall, but she ignored the pain. Walker led her into a small, run-down diner. The place was nearly empty, save for an elderly waitress behind the counter and a man reading a newspaper in the corner booth. They slid into a booth at the back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They were still catching their breath, still processing everything. Then, Walker reached into his jacket and pulled out the flash drive. He set it on the table between them. Hannah stared at it. "That thing nearly got us killed," she muttered. Walker nodded. "And it's the only thing that can save us." The waitress shuffled over, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "You two look like you've been through hell," she remarked. Hannah gave a weak smile. "Something like that." The waitress eyed her belly. "You shouldn't be running around like that, sweetheart. You need to take it easy." Hannah swallowed hard. She knew the woman was right. But how could she rest when everything was falling apart? The waitress left, and Walker took a sip of his coffee. "We need to figure out our next move." Hannah sighed. "We can't go to the police. We can't go to the FBI. So who do we trust?" Walker hesitated. Then, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "There's one person," he said. Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Walker's eyes darkened. "Someone I hoped I'd never have to call." Before Hannah could ask more, Walker pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then, a deep voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call," the voice said. Walker exhaled. "We need your help." A pause. Then, "Meet me at the old train yard in an hour." "And Walker?" Walker tensed. "Yeah. Don't bring trouble." The line went dead. Hannah frowned. "Who was that?" Walker slipped his phone back into his pocket. "My old partner." An hour later, they arrived at the abandoned train yard. Rusted tracks stretched in every direction, and the skeletal remains of old train cars stood like forgotten ghosts. The air smelled like oil and damp metal. Walker scanned the area. "He's here." Hannah followed his gaze. A man stepped out from behind one of the train cars. He was tall, muscular, with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a leather jacket and had a presence that commanded attention. "Walker," the man greeted. His voice was steady, unreadable. Walker nodded. "Cole." Hannah glanced between them. There was tension in the air, an unspoken history she didn't understand. Cole's eyes flickered to her, then to her stomach. "And who's this?" "Hannah," Walker said. "She saved my life." Cole gave a short nod. "Then she's got more guts than most people I know." Hannah crossed her arms. "Are you going to help us or not?" Cole smirked. "Straight to business." "I like her." He turned serious. "I heard about what happened. The Bureau is a mess right now. Grayson's trying to clean things up, but those corrupt agents? They're still out there." Walker held up the flash drive. "This has everything we need to expose them." Cole's expression darkened. "Then you're both in more danger than you realize." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. Walker frowned. "What do you mean?" Cole hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to Walker. Walker unfolded it, and his face went pale. Hannah leaned over and gasped. It was a printed photo of them, taken just hours ago, running from her apartment. Scrawled across the bottom were 4 words. "We're coming for you." Hannah's stomach dropped. They weren't just being chased. They were being hunted. The weight of the message pressed down on them like a vice. The grainy black and white photo of Hannah and Walker running from her apartment was proof that their enemies were closer than they thought. Hannah swallowed hard, her mind racing. "They took this today." Walker clenched his jaw. "They knew where we were before we did." Cole remained unreadable as he crossed his arms. "This means 2 things," he said. 1, you've rattled the right cages. And 2, you're out of time. Hannah inhaled sharply. "What do we do?" Cole nodded toward the flash drive still in Walker's hand. "That's the key. But you need to get it into the right hands before they kill you both." Walker's grip tightened around the small device. "We thought about giving it to Grayson." Cole shook his head. "Bad idea. Grayson's trying to clean up the mess, but he's not untouchable. If he disappears, so does your evidence." Hannah exhaled, trying to fight off the creeping dread. "Then who do we trust?" For the first time, Cole hesitated. "There's a journalist," he said finally. "Her name is Elise Carter. If you want this story out before they can bury it, she's your best bet." Walker frowned. "I know that name." "You should," Cole said. "She's been exposing government corruption for years. The problem is, she's got enemies. Big ones. They've tried to silence her before." Hannah leaned forward. "But she's still alive, isn't she?" Cole's lips twitched. "Barely." Walker exhaled. "Where is she?" Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out another slip of paper. He handed it to Walker. "She's in Chicago. Staying off the radar after her last expose nearly got her killed. Hannah frowned. So we just waltz into Chicago and knock on her door? Cole shook his head. No. You call this number when you get there. She'll tell you where to meet. Walker studied the number on the paper. Hannah glanced back at Cole. And what about you? Cole's expression hardened. I'll buy you time. Slow them down, misdirect them, make them think you're somewhere else. Walker narrowed his eyes. And what happens when they find out you lied? Cole smirked. Then I do what I do best. I disappear. Something in his voice told Hannah that this wasn't just a favor. This was personal. Walker hesitated before shoving the paper into his pocket. Thanks, Cole. Cole's face softened, just for a moment. Don't thank me yet. Then, his expression darkened. Now get out of here before they catch up. They had less than 24 hours to get to Chicago. Walker drove. Hannah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the endless stretch of highway. The city lights of New York had faded hours ago, replaced by rolling fields and scattered roadside diners. She was exhausted. Every bone in her body ached, but she couldn't sleep. Not with the photos still fresh in her mind. Someone had been watching them, tracking them, and they weren't going to stop. Walker glanced at her. You okay? Hannah let out a humorless laugh. I just jumped out of a window, got shot at, and found out we're being hunted. So no, not really. Walker smirked. Yeah, fair point. Silence stretched between them for a moment before Hannah finally asked, How do you know Cole? Walker's hands tightened on the wheel. He used to be my partner. Hannah's brows lifted. FBI. Walker shook his head. CIA. She blinked. Wait, you were in the CIA? Walker exhaled. A long time ago. Hannah studied him. There was a weight behind his words, something unspoken. What happened? Walker hesitated. Then he sighed. Let's just say, I learned the hard way that the people in power don't always have the right intentions. Hannah frowned. Is that why you became a whistleblower? Walker nodded. I saw too much. People getting silenced. Files disappearing. And when I tried to expose it, they turned me into the enemy. Hannah exhaled. She had always believed that the law protected people, that justice would prevail. But now, she wasn't so sure. We'll get the truth out, she said, more to herself than to him. Walker glanced at her. Yeah, we will. They drove in silence for a while, the road stretching endlessly ahead of them. Then, without warning, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Fast. Too fast. Hannah stiffened. Walker. I see it. The car behind them sped up. Walker's grip on the wheel tightened. Hold on. Suddenly, the car behind them swerved, ramming into their bumper. The force sent Hannah jolting forward against her seatbelt. Damn it, Walker muttered. Another hit. The vehicle behind them wasn't just following them. It was trying to run them off the road. Hannah's pulse skyrocketed. What do we do? Walker scanned the road ahead. There was an exit coming up, but it led into a stretch of dense woods. He made a split-second decision. Hang on. He yanked the wheel to the right. The car skidded, tires screeching as they veered off the highway onto the dark, winding exit road. The pursuing vehicle followed. Walker pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The road was narrow, trees blurring past them as they sped through the darkness. But the other car wasn't letting up. Another hard hit from behind. The tires skidded, and Hannah let out a sharp gasp as the car nearly spun out. Walker fought for control, his jaw clenched. Then up ahead, a bridge. And beyond it, nothing. The road ended. Hannah's stomach dropped. Walker. I see it. The car chasing them wasn't slowing down. They were trapped. Walker had seconds to make a choice. And in the next moment, he made it. With one last, desperate move, Walker yanked the wheel hard to the left. The car spun. Tires screeched. Then, impact. Everything went black. A sharp ringing filled Hannah's ears. Darkness. Then, pain. A deep, searing pain in her ribs, her shoulder, her legs. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, like she was sinking into the earth itself. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open. The world was sideways. Shattered glass. Smoke. The bitter smell of burning rubber. The car was upside down. For a moment, her mind refused to process what had happened. Then, it hit her all at once. The chase, the bridge, the crash. Walker. Panic jolted through her veins as she turned her head. Walker was slumped over in the driver's seat, blood trickling down his forehead. Walker, she croaked. Her throat was raw, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't move. No. No, no, no. Ignoring the pain screaming through her body, she reached over and shook him. Walker, a groan. Relief flooded her. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a second, he looked disoriented. Then his instincts kicked in. He coughed, winced, and turned to her. You okay? He asked, his voice rough. Hannah let out a shaky breath. Not really. Walker blinked, then groaned as he tried to move. We need to get out of here. Hannah nodded weakly. She turned her head, peering through the shattered window. The other car, the one that had chased them, was nowhere to be seen. But that didn't mean they were safe. Sirens. Faint in the distance, but getting closer. Walker cursed under his breath. They're coming. Hannah struggled against her seatbelt, but the angle was all wrong. She was pinned. I can't get out. Walker gritted his teeth and reached for her buckle, fumbling with it. His fingers were slick with blood. Hold on. With one last tug, the seatbelt released, and Hannah tumbled onto the roof of the overturned car. Pain exploded through her limbs, but she forced herself to move. Walker followed, dragging himself through the shattered window. He grunted as he crawled out, his body battered and bruised. The moment they were both free, he grabbed Hannah's hand and pulled her up. We have to run, he said. Hannah swayed on her feet. I don't think I can. Walker cursed. He scanned their surroundings. Woods on both sides, the broken bridge behind them, and up ahead, the flickering glow of approaching headlights. Too late to hide. Too late to run. The sirens grew louder. Walker turned to her. No matter what happens, don't say anything. Hannah's stomach twisted. Then, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of them. Not the police. Something worse. The back door swung open, and a man stepped out. Not just any man. One of the fake agents from before. He smiled. Tough night. Walker's fists clenched. If you're here to kill us, get it over with. The man chuckled. Now. If we wanted you dead, you wouldn't be standing. Hannah's hands curled into fists. What do you want? The man's eyes flickered to her belly. You're quite the fighter, Miss Collins. A shame, really. Walker took a step in front of her. The man smirked. Relax. We're not here for you. His eyes shifted to Walker. We're here for him. Hannah's heart stopped. No. The man took a slow step forward. You have something that belongs to us. Walker's jaw tightened. Not anymore. Hannah's breath hitched. What was he doing? The agent studied him for a moment, then sighed. You're a smart man, Walker. Smarter than most. You know how this ends. Walker didn't move. The agent smirked. You come with us, and the girl walks away. Hannah's pulse pounded. No, she blurted out. That's not happening. The agent's gaze snapped to her. It's the only offer you get. Walker turned slightly, just enough for Hannah to see his face. And she knew. He was going to do it. No, she whispered. Walker gave her a look, one she didn't like. Then, before she could react, he stepped forward. I'll go, he said. Hannah grabbed his arm. Walker, no. His fingers brushed against hers, just for a second. You have to finish this, he murmured. The words sent chills down her spine. The agent grinned. Smart choice. Two men stepped out of the SUV, grabbing Walker by the arms. Hannah's throat tightened. Don't do this. Walker didn't look back. The agent turned to Hannah. You should count yourself lucky. She glared at him, her body trembling with rage. If you hurt him, I swear. The agent smirked. Save your threats. You'll never see him again. And with that, they shoved Walker into the SUV. The doors slammed shut. And before Hannah could do anything, the car sped off into the night, leaving her alone, injured, helpless, and furious. Walker had saved her. Now, it was her turn to save him. And she wasn't going to stop until she did. Hannah stood frozen in the middle of the deserted road, her pulse roaring in her ears as the taillights of the black SUV disappeared into the darkness. Walker was gone. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Her body ached from the crash. Her ribs screamed in pain, but none of it mattered. The only thing she could think about was the last look Walker had given her. The silent plea, the unspoken message. You have to finish this. She clenched her fists. She wasn't going to let them take him. Not without a fight. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to move. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she pushed through the pain. She had no idea where they had taken him, no clue how much time she had. But she wasn't giving up. A familiar voice echoed in her head. There's always a way out. And she was going to find it. She stumbled into a gas station about half a mile down the road, her body still running on adrenaline. The attendant, a tired-looking man in his 40s, blinked at her as she pushed through the door. Miss, are you okay? No, she admitted. I need a phone. The man hesitated, then slid his cell phone across the counter. You need me to call the cops? Hannah thought about it, but no. The cops couldn't help her now. She took the phone and quickly dialed the only number she had left. It rang twice before a voice answered. I was expecting this call, Cole said. Hannah gripped the phone tighter. They took him. Cole was silent for a beat. Where? I don't know. They ran us off the road. A black SUV. Fake agents. Cole sighed. I told him not to be an idiot. Hannah swallowed hard. We have to get him back. I know. A pause. Then, listen carefully, Hannah, Cole said. They won't kill him right away. They'll want information first. But we don't have much time. Hannah's stomach turned. So what do we do? Cole's voice hardened. We go to war. An hour later, Hannah sat in the back of Cole's car, staring out at the dark horizon. She had told herself she wouldn't cry. She hadn't. Not yet. Cole drove in silence, his fingers tapping against the wheel. The tension in the car was thick, heavy with everything that had just happened. Finally, he spoke. I know where they took him. Hannah's head snapped toward him. What? Cole kept his eyes on the road. They're holding him in a black site. Off the books. A place they use for situations like this. A cold chill ran down Hannah's spine. How do you know that? She asked. Cole exhaled. Because I used to work there. Hannah stared at him. Walker had said Cole was ex-CIA. She had figured he had done some questionable things in the past, but she hadn't realized how deep it went. What kind of place are we talking about? Cole's grip tightened on the wheel. Not a prison. Not an office. Just a hole in the ground where people disappear. Hannah's breath hitched. No, she wasn't going to let that happen to Walker. Cole glanced at her. You sure you're up for this? Hannah's jaw clenched. I'm not backing down. Cole smirked. Good. Because this is going to get messy. By the time they reached the outskirts of the facility, the sky was beginning to lighten. The place was exactly what Hannah had feared, a nondescript warehouse, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A few security cameras. 2 guards at the front gate. It didn't look like much. But Hannah knew better. This isn't just a warehouse, is it? She murmured. Cole shook his head. It's underground. The real facility is beneath this place. Hannah exhaled. How do we get in? Cole gave her a sideways glance. Normally? You don't. Hannah shot him a glare. That's not helpful. Cole smirked. Relax. I have a plan. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small device, no bigger than a deck of cards. What's that? Hannah asked. A distraction. Cole flicked a switch, and within seconds, an alarm blared from inside the compound. The 2 guards at the front entrance immediately sprang into action, speaking into their radios before running toward the sound. Cole turned to Hannah. That's our window. Move. They slipped through the fence and sprinted toward the building. Cole led her to a side door, pulling out a keycard. Hannah raised an eyebrow. You still have access? Cole grinned. Let's just say they weren't great at revoking old credentials. The door clicked open. They slipped inside. The facility was eerily quiet. Dimly lit hallways stretched in every direction, lined with steel doors and security panels. Cole moved quickly, leading Hannah deeper into the underground maze. Walker will be in one of the interrogation rooms, he whispered. We need to get to him before they move him somewhere worse. Hannah's heart pounded. She couldn't afford to be afraid. They turned a corner and came face to face with a guard. The man's eyes widened. Before he could react, Cole lunged, slamming him against the wall. The guard struggled, but Cole was faster. A quick, precise strike to the throat, and the man crumpled. Hannah swallowed hard. Cole gave her a look. Stay focused. She nodded, forcing herself to keep moving. Finally, they reached a locked steel door. Cole pulled a small tablet from his jacket and plugged it into the security panel. Give me a minute. Hannah pressed her ear to the door. Voices. And one of them. Her heart clenched. Walker. He was inside. And he didn't sound good. We're out of time, she whispered. Cole worked faster. Almost there. A sharp cry came from inside. Walker. Hannah didn't think. She grabbed the fallen guard's gun, took a step back, and kicked the door in. The sight before her made her blood boil. Walker was strapped to a chair, his face bruised, blood dripping from a fresh cut on his temple. And standing over him was the same smirking agent from before. The agent turned, his eyes widening in surprise. Hannah raised the gun. Get away from him. The agent's smirk returned. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Hannah's hands didn't shake. I'm not warning you again. The agent chuckled. You won't shoot. Hannah's eyes burned. Try me. The agent moved, and Hannah pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out, sharp and deafening. The agent barely had time to react before the bullet tore through his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward with a pained grunt. His smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock. Hannah's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't lower the gun. She had never shot anyone before, but she had warned him. She wasn't playing games. Cole stepped in, moving fast. In one swift motion, he grabbed the agent's collar and slammed him against the wall. The man groaned in pain, blood seeping through his shirt. You should have listened to her, Cole muttered. Hannah didn't waste another second. She rushed to Walker's side, her heart twisting at the sight of him. He looked terrible, his face bruised, his knuckles bloodied, his breathing heavy. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were still full of fire. Hannah, he rasped, blinking as if he couldn't believe she was really there. Her throat tightened. I'm here. She reached for the restraints around his wrists, fumbling with them. Cole had pulled a knife from his belt and pressed it to the agent's throat. Who else is here? The agent chuckled weakly, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. You think this is over? He rasped. You have no idea what's coming. Cole's expression darkened. Last chance. The agent's smirk returned, just before he bit down on something in his mouth. A cyanide capsule. His body went rigid. Then, he slumped forward, lifeless. Hannah's stomach churned. What the hell? Cole let out a sharp curse. That means we just ran out of time. Finally, Walker's restraints snapped free, and he sagged forward. Hannah caught him, struggling under his weight. Can you walk? She asked urgently. Walker gritted his teeth. I don't have a choice. Cole grabbed a gun off the dead agent and moved toward the door. We need to go? Now. Hannah slung Walker's arm over her shoulder, helping him up. He winced but forced himself to move. They stepped into the hallway, and the alarms blared. Red warning lights flashed as the facility roared to life. Heavy boots thundered down the corridors. Cole swore under his breath. They know we're here. Hannah's pulse pounded. What do we do? Walker groaned. We fight. Cole smirked. That's the spirit. The first wave of guards rounded the corner. Cole lifted his gun. Stay behind me. Then, chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded in the narrow hallway, the deafening cracks bouncing off the steel walls. Hannah ducked as Cole fired off several shots, taking down 2 guards instantly. Walker gritted his teeth, still weak, but refusing to let it slow him down. He grabbed a fallen guard's gun and turned, shooting another in the leg. Hannah had never been in a real fight before, let alone a gunfight. But she wasn't about to freeze up now. She gripped her weapon tightly, aiming at the guard rushing toward them. Her hands didn't shake this time. She pulled the trigger. The guard crumpled. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Cole kicked open a side door. This way. They ran. The facility was a maze of endless hallways, each one leading deeper into the underground complex. The alarms blared louder, echoing off the walls. More guards were coming. Walker stumbled slightly, his injuries catching up to him. Hannah tightened her grip around his waist. Stay with me. I'm not going anywhere, he muttered. Cole suddenly stopped at another door. He turned to them, his expression grim. You're not gonna like this. Walker frowned. What? Cole pushed open the door, revealing a dark, narrow shaft leading straight down. A ventilation tunnel. Hannah swallowed hard. You've got to be kidding me. No time to complain. Cole stepped inside first, dropping down. He landed with a quiet thud. Walker groaned. This is gonna hurt. Hannah tightened her grip. I've got you. Walker smirked weakly. I'll hold you to that. Then, together, they dropped. The tunnel led them to a storm drain beneath the facility. It was cold, damp, and smelled like rusted metal, but Hannah didn't care. They were free. For now. Cole wiped sweat from his forehead. That was fun. Walker let out a weak laugh. You have a twisted idea of fun. Hannah scanned the area. What now? Cole pulled out his phone. Now? We disappear. Walker leaned against the wall, exhaling sharply. His face was pale, his body still recovering from the torture he had endured. Hannah placed a hand on his shoulder. We're not done, are we? Walker met her eyes. Not even close. Cole tapped his phone. We need to get the flash drive to Elise Carter. She's our only shot at exposing this. Hannah's stomach tightened. And if we don't? Walker's expression darkened. Then they win. And that was something Hannah refused to let happen. They had less than 24 hours to reach Elise Carter. Hannah sat in the back of a stolen sedan, her heart still pounding from their escape. The storm drain had led them to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, where Cole had borrowed a car that, according to him, belonged to someone who wouldn't be needing it anytime soon. Walker sat beside her, his head leaning back against the seat. His injuries were worse than he let on. His face was swollen, his knuckles were bloodied, and his breaths were shallow. But his eyes remained sharp, locked onto the road ahead as Cole drove. "Chicago's still a few hours out," Cole said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We'll have to lay low when we get there." Hannah exhaled, gripping the stolen gun in her lap. "And then what?" Walker didn't answer right away. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out the flash drive, the small device that had nearly cost him his life. "We give this to Elise," he murmured, "and we blow the whole thing wide open." Hannah frowned. "You really think they're just going to let that happen?" Walker met her gaze. "No, that was the problem. They weren't just running anymore. They weren't just trying to survive. They were going to war." They reached Chicago by sunrise. The city was just waking up, people pouring into the streets, taxis honking, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from corner shops. It felt normal, but for Hannah, there was nothing normal about today. She glanced at Walker, who had barely spoken since they left. He was running on fumes, but he refused to rest. Cole pulled into an underground parking garage and killed the engine. "All right," he said. "Now we wait." Hannah frowned. "For what?" Cole tapped his phone. "For Elise." Walker glanced around. "Are we sure she's not compromised?" Cole smirked. "If she was, we'd already be dead." That wasn't exactly comforting. Minutes passed. Then, a knock at the window. Hannah flinched, instinctively reaching for her gun. But Cole simply smirked and rolled down the window. A woman stood there, her dark brown hair pulled into a tight bun, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She wore a leather jacket and had the kind of presence that demanded attention. "Elise Carter," Cole said. "Still alive, I see." Elise smirked. "Can't say the same for some of my sources." She leaned down, peering into the car. Her sharp gaze landed on Walker. "So, you're the infamous Ryan Walker." Walker didn't blink. "And you're the journalist they keep trying to kill." Elise grinned. "That's me." Hannah shifted. "Can we trust you?" Elise straightened, slipping her hands into her jacket pockets. "Depends," she said. "Do you have something worth trusting me with?" Walker pulled out the flash drive. "You tell me." Elise's smirk disappeared. She took a slow breath. "Get out of the car," she said. "We need to talk." They followed Elise into a small, dimly lit office space above a laundromat. It was cluttered, papers stacked on desks, half-empty coffee cups, a whiteboard covered in notes, and arrows pointing to government officials' names. Hannah's stomach twisted. This woman had been digging into corruption for years. And now, they were part of her next big story. Elise locked the door behind them. "All right," she said, folding her arms. "Show me." Walker stepped forward, placing the flash drive on her desk. Elise plugged it into her laptop, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. Seconds passed. Then, her face paled. Hannah's breath caught. "What is it?" Elise didn't look up. "This," she whispered, eyes scanning the screen. "This is bigger than I thought." Hannah exchanged a glance with Walker. Elise clicked a file, and a series of documents filled the screen. Government memos, classified emails, transaction records, all linking high-ranking officials to illegal surveillance programs, assassinations, and cover-ups. Walker exhaled. "This is enough to take them down." Elise's jaw tightened. "Yeah," she muttered. "If I live long enough to publish it." Hannah clenched her fists. "We need to move fast." Elise nodded. "I can encrypt and send this to every major news outlet within the hour." Cole shifted. "They'll come after you." Elise smirked. "They already do." Walker stepped forward. "We need to do more than just leak the files. We need proof that they're still after us. A way to show the world that they won't stop, even now." Elise tilted her head. "You mean, bait them?" Walker nodded. Hannah's stomach dropped. "Wait, are you saying?" Walker turned to her. "We make them come for us." Cole chuckled. "Now that's a terrible idea." Elise smirked. "I love it." Hannah groaned. "This is insane." Walker met her gaze. "I know," he said, "but it's the only way." Hannah exhaled, her mind racing. If they did this, there was no going back. No more running. No more hiding. They were drawing the enemy into the light. And they were going to finish this. Hannah tightened her jaw. I'm in. Elise grinned. Then let's get to work. The plan was simple. Make them come. Elise worked fast, encrypting the files and sending them to every major news outlet she trusted. It was a dangerous gamble. If their enemies intercepted the transmission, they'd come after her before the story could spread. That's exactly what they wanted. Hannah stood near the window, watching the darkened streets below. She could feel it. The storm was coming. Walker sat on the couch, rolling his injured shoulder with a wince. He was pushing through the pain, but Hannah knew the toll it had taken on him. Cole leaned against the desk, watching Elise work. How long? Elise didn't look up. Less than an hour before they realize what I've done. Walker exhaled. Then we don't have much time. Hannah turned to them. Are we sure this is a good idea? Walker met her eyes. It's not. Cole smirked. But it's our best one. Hannah swallowed hard. She had been running for so long, caught in something bigger than she could ever have imagined. But now, for the first time, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground. She tightened her grip on the gun at her side. Then let's finish this. The trap was set. Elise made sure the leak was loud. The files weren't just sent to the press. They were sent to government watchdogs, independent journalists, even public forums. And she left a trail, a digital fingerprint leading straight back to their location. Hannah's heart pounded as they waited. Cole checked his watch. They'll send a cleanup crew. Walker nodded. And we'll be waiting. The lights in the office were off. The only illumination came from Elise's laptop screen. The windows were cracked open to keep them from overheating. Every exit had been mapped out. It was all about control. They weren't running this time. They were choosing where the fight would happen. Hannah shifted. What if they don't come? Cole chuckled. Oh, they'll come. They don't have a choice. Walker's eyes darkened. They need to bury this before it spreads. The air grew thick with tension. Then, a flicker of movement. Hannah's breath hitched as a black SUV rolled to a stop outside the laundromat. Then another. And another. Walker's jaw tightened. They're here. Elise shut her laptop and stood. Let's give them a warm welcome. The first man through the door never saw it coming. The moment he stepped into the darkened laundromat below, Cole moved like a ghost. A swift strike, silent, precise. The man crumpled. Hannah barely had time to react before more footsteps echoed down the hall. Stay sharp, Walker murmured, gripping his gun. The second man entered cautiously, gun raised. He was met with a fist to the throat. Cole didn't hesitate. He caught the man's wrist, twisted, and disarmed him in seconds. A suppressed gunshot rang out. The man went down. Hannah's pulse pounded. This was real. More shadows moved outside. They weren't just sending a few agents. They were sending an army. Elise cursed. They're not messing around. Walker glanced at Hannah. You ready? Hannah's fingers curled around her gun. No, she admitted. But she raised it anyway. Walker gave her a small nod. Good answer. The next wave came fast. Footsteps thundered up the stairwell, and the door burst open. Gunfire erupted. Hannah dove behind the couch as bullets shredded the desk beside her. Walker and Cole returned fire, their movements quick and controlled. Elise grabbed a second gun from under her desk and fired at the doorway. The men kept coming. Hannah steadied her breathing, lined up her shot, and pulled the trigger. One of the agents staggered, collapsing. Another rushed in, and Hannah shot again, missing by inches. Walker moved beside her, taking out the man before he could fire back. You're getting better. Hannah exhaled. Not good enough. More gunfire. More chaos. Cole took out two men before ducking behind a cabinet. We need an exit. Elise reloaded. There's a fire escape, but they'll have it covered. Walker clenched his jaw. Then we go through them. Hannah's breath caught. Are you crazy? Cole grinned. No, but I like it. Walker turned to Elise. How much time before the leak spreads? Elise checked her watch. 30 minutes, max. Walker nodded. Then we just have to survive until then. More agents stormed the room. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. They fought like cornered animals. Hannah had never experienced anything like it. The raw intensity, the instinct to survive. Walker was relentless. Even injured, he moved like a trained warrior, taking out men twice his size with brutal efficiency. Cole was precise. Every shot, every strike calculated. Elise wasn't just a journalist. She was a survivor. And Hannah? She refused to die here. They held their ground, taking out every agent who stormed through the door. But they were running out of ammo. And time. Walker exhaled sharply. We can't keep this up. Cole wiped sweat from his brow. Then let's end it. A sudden silence fell over the room. The gunfire stopped. Then a voice. You've put up a hell of a fight. Hannah stiffened. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Then, from the shadows, a man stepped forward. Not just any man. The same man who had taken Walker. The leader of the operation. He smirked. You really thought you could win? Walker clenched his fists. You lost the moment that file went out. The man chuckled. Did I? Then, he raised a detonator. Hannah's stomach dropped. Cole cursed. Damn it. The man's smirk deepened. You all die here. Hannah's breath caught. Walker's muscles tensed. The man pressed his thumb against the detonator, and gunfire rang out. The man staggered, eyes wide. Blood bloomed on his chest. He collapsed. Hannah's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Cole stood over him, gun still smoking. Walker exhaled. You had a shot this whole time? Cole smirked. Figured I'd let him talk. The detonator clattered to the ground, and used. The room fell silent. Then, sirens. Real ones this time. Elise smirked. Guess my leak worked. Walker let out a slow breath. It's over. Hannah's heart pounded. We won. Cole shrugged. For now. And then, the world saw the truth. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue lights flooding the room through the shattered windows. Hannah's breath came in shaky gasps, her fingers still locked around the gun in her hands. It was over. It had to be over. Walker exhaled sharply beside her, his body swaying slightly. He was barely standing, exhaustion and blood loss catching up to him. Hannah moved to steady him, but he gave her a weak smirk. We actually did it, he murmured. Cole chuckled, holstering his gun. You sound surprised. Elise peered out the window, watching the swarm of real federal agents, police, and journalists flood the street below. She tapped the laptop still sitting on the desk. I wouldn't celebrate just yet, she muttered. This is only the beginning. Hannah's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Elise turned, her face grim. We've exposed them, yeah? The files went out. The media is running with the story. Every corrupt agent on that drive is being put under the spotlight. Walker straightened. But, Elise sighed. But they're not all going to fall overnight. Some of these people are powerful. They'll fight back. Hannah swallowed. And what about the ones who tried to kill us? Cole nudged the dead man with the toe of his boot. This guy was important, but he wasn't the head of the snake. Walker clenched his fists. So someone else is still out there. Elise nodded. Yeah, and they're not going to just roll over and let this happen. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of it all pressed down on Hannah's chest. They had won, but only this battle. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The FBI arrived first. Real agents, this time. Grayson was leading them, his face hard as he stepped over the bodies littering the room. His sharp eyes locked onto Walker. Damn it, Walker, he muttered. You really couldn't just lay low? Walker smirked. Where's the fun in that? Grayson exhaled, shaking his head. He turned to Hannah and Cole. You all good? Hannah nodded. We'll live. Grayson's gaze shifted to Elise. You realize what you've done, don't you? Elise smiled. Yeah, I made your life a hell of a lot harder. Grayson sighed. The Bureau is about to be torn apart from the inside. Half the people I work with are being investigated. Some are already trying to run. Walker tilted his head. And you? Grayson gave him a knowing look. I'm staying. Someone has to clean up this mess. Hannah exhaled. And the people who try to kill us? Grayson's face darkened. We'll find them. Walker crossed his arms. And when you do? Grayson met his eyes. You'll be the first to know. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't tied up in a neat little bow. But it was enough. For now. 2 weeks later. Hannah sat on a park bench, the sun warm on her skin. The city was alive. People moving around her as if the world hadn't just changed. But for her, everything had changed. Walker sat beside her, looking better than he had in weeks. The bruises had faded. The cuts had healed. But there was still something in his eyes, a weight that hadn't lifted. What now? She asked. Walker stretched his legs out in front of him, watching the people pass by. That depends. Hannah raised an eyebrow. On what? Walker smirked. You. She scoffed. Me? You didn't have to stay, you know, he said. You could have walked away from all this. Hannah glanced down at her belly, resting a protective hand over it. And go back to what? Walker was silent. Then, finally, he said, you could start over. Hannah turned to him. So could you. Walker let out a small, humorless laugh. Not sure I know how. Hannah studied him. Then maybe we figure it out together. Walker blinked, caught off guard. Hannah smiled. Besides, you still owe me for that whole getting kidnapped thing. Walker chuckled. You're never gonna let that go, are you? Not a chance. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Not because everything was perfect, not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, she wasn't alone. She had fought for something. She had survived. And she wasn't done yet. Not even close. Walker sighed. All right, he said, pushing himself up. Let's go. Hannah grinned. Where? Walker smirked. To wherever the next fight takes us.